That's right.
Yes. Now, Alan, I hope you're well tonight. And yes, I'd love to first, of course, know a little bit more about this book that you have written. When did you write it and what was your reasons for writing the book?
Well, it started at the end of 2011, which was the year I had the operation, robotic surgery. But it actually probably started within a week of getting stuff and thoughts out of my mind, because following the surgery, my head was just full of stuff. That's the only way I can describe it. And it was actually summer, so I was having difficulty sleeping. Mine was abuzz with information. How do I get this out? What do I do with it? I eventually just started making exercise book of notes for myself. So I got towards the end of 2011 and I felt I can maybe create a book out of this to give me information about things they may or may not get told about, but also more of the deeper stuff about the psychological adjustment, the relationship stuff, you know, ways to deal with having sex and, you know, having erections and things like that. And that happened over 4 or 5 years. So 2016, I think it was, we eventually got around to a point of publishing it. And it was more about making men and their partners aware of the outcome of surgery, bearing in mind that all men are different and everyone will travel differently, and it depends on their age and their health and where the relationship is at. So interestingly enough, last year I was driving somewhere around Melbourne, listening to the ABC, as you do, and they were interviewing an author, and the question was it as a catalyst for you? And all of a sudden the penny dropped for me and went, oh, it was for me too. I hadn't seen that as such at the time of writing and publishing and promoting it. But, you know, 2.5 years after publishing, it had been a catalyst for me, because I felt I then had some authority to write about it. Having been on active surveillance for 10 years, I had thoughts around writing a book, but wasn't sure whether I could, and it was only about active surveillance. But once I been down that journey of having prostate cancer and having to lose my prostate, then I felt I had some authority in writing a book. Doesn't mean it's the final word, of course, but it's very, to me, a very Australian book in terminology and what is available currently, and that's changed as well. So there are some books out there, but from my observation, there's none that maybe drop below the line about talking what really goes on for couples in a relationship.
Yeah, and I want to say that's something I really enjoyed reading this. You call it a one-man story and practical survival guide for prostate cancer. And I think that's bang on. It's very practical. And look, you really are just saying it like it is. It is, of course, your journey. But, you know, you talk through very openly around, you know, when you decided to go to counselling, what your reservations were before that, how that was for you. And you mentioned before, you know, the psychological adjustments, which is something I've always wanted to talk to somebody about really openly on the show. And I'd want to know, could you talk us through what was that like for you and that journey you went through with approaching counselling for that?
Yes, I guess because of my background in counselling, part of me was going, well, I'm a counsellor, I know what to do, but it's the old physician, heal thyself sort of approach. So I was dealing with incontinence. For me, it took a little bit longer to get better. It was getting better, but the sexual aspect of most men, when they want to have sex prior to having prostate cancer, generally can have sex when they want to. Bearing in mind, as men get older, it can take a bit longer. It depends on stimulation and what goes on in your brain as well. But all of a sudden, it's this 180-degree turn. Okay, now to be intimate, I either take Viagra or Cialis, or I have to inject myself. So you've got to organise a time when you want to be intimate. So it takes that spontaneity out of it. But also, I cannot put my finger on what exactly was going on for me, but certainly towards the end of 2011, I was struggling with around the whole sexuality. And this is how we're going to have sex now. I got to, you know, 2 o'clock, you want to have sex in 3 o'clock, or make sure I don't eat anything for an hour before taking Viagra. I really want to be intimate today, but I'm going to have to stick myself with a needle. So I thought, okay, I've got to get my head around this. So I took myself off to counselling with the Vietnam Veterans Council Service. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for me, realising how I've been functioning in the past with my sexuality, with, you know, other relationships, and I guess using that sexuality to, well, occasionally have affairs and all that sort of stuff. So it was a real, I talk about my shadow. Well, we all have shadows. Some of us may not. But that was my shadow, how I've been functioning for a long time, I guess, off and on. And now it's changed but it's a real eye-opener. So it took a number of sessions for me to get my head around it, and it took some time for me then to work out how I'm going to now function in a completely different way. So like you call it, adjusting to a new normal, because you cannot go back. And the relationship has to change one way, shape, or another. And some people change. Some relationships go good. Others it can fall over, depending on their age. I guess I have to say, for me and Fiona, being intimate was very important for us. It was a second marriage for both of us. We'd only been married 2 and a bit years, so it was really at the forefront. And I will say, even though this is my journey, we were in Gippsland last year promoting the Navigate project with Peter Mack about low-risk prostate cancer. And on the second night, we had a couple of couples come up and talk to us. And one couple, he was only in his late 60s, and he'd just been diagnosed, but given a Gleason score with no explanation. But all I knew that was going to affect their way of being intimate, but not given any information. And they were on the verge of tears. I went, my God, there's a hole down in Gippsland of men and their partners not getting enough information, or where to go to, or who do they talk to next about this sort of aspect that's not really discussed, as far as I'm concerned, around post-prostate cancer surgery. Mostly there are flow-on effects from radiotherapy. And again, every couple is different, and they find ways to deal with that. But just seeing it from my side and seeing a couple on the other side who are about to enter this, and they were, I'm not exaggerating, they were both on the verge of tears. Actually, I get quite emotional thinking about that. They had nowhere to go, basically. I mean, there is a prostate cancer nurse down there, but I don't think they knew about her either. I thought, far out. There's an unknown quantity there. There's a well of couples out there that aren't maybe being taken care of. Oh, we've got it out. You're all right. Get on with life. Make a few adjustments, but it's deep. And in my presentation, that's wounding of the soul. Men get affected very deeply, how they see themselves, masculinity, how their intimacy now is going to happen, how they have erections, how they deal with incontinence, that interferes with being intimate. And even just talking about it, 7 years down the track, it still brings up emotion for me, thinking I've moved on, but it's still sitting there, and it's quite a deep impact on relationships. That's how I see it. And of course, everyone will move on, do it differently. Some couples are quite happy just to cuddle and hold hands, and that's okay. How you adjust is important, but I think understanding it's more than just surgery. It's really quite a deep impact. And being intimate with your partner is part of whatever relationship is in general. And I understand when some relationships where they've been together for a long time, maybe not important anymore. So therefore, you have to find another way of showing that affection and not just let it go as well.
Thank you. I felt that emotion as well of seeing that couple that you saw. I've also met couples where it's that information that they weren't finding, or that they suddenly find themselves on the other side. As you said, look, it's a new normal. You can't go back from that. You're just in the new world. You've landed in this new place. And, do you have a map? Did you know what you were going to expect in this new world? All that makes a huge impact then on how deep that adjustment is, and the psychological impact of it as well. I'm interested, you've talked to on your journey with the book and with your own experience as a counsellor, and you're also a support group leader, I should mention too. You've talked to so many men and their partners now. What patterns do you notice in terms of information that you see as not being necessarily delivered as maybe as best it could be, before and maybe just after surgery? What would you think needs to change in that space? Well,
they get told about the different medications they can use, whether it's the needle and, fantastic pump that you've got, which is, for some men is a bit of a real lifesaver. And they sort of some men look at your blanket, what do I want a pump for? And you've got to explain to them that actually Percy, i.e. the penis, is a muscle, and it needs to be stretched because you have to do that to get blood flow, etc. And I don't think that's even explained. I mean, I didn't find out about the pump until basically we had met. I knew nothing about it. Don't ask me why I didn't Google something. Don't know. But now it's my first thing. Do you know about the pump and why it's important? Having said that, I will say that Peter Mack Cancer Centre here in Melbourne now want to run a model of a pre-robotic surgery information afternoon for men and their couples, and now I've become involved with it. So that's a great model No one else is doing it as far as I know. So they get to see what goes on. And we do talk about sexuality and intimacy, but it's like at the end, and maybe it's a bit too much information. There's no post-surgery stuff. Again, and I see there's a high need for that if couples want it, but I see a need for that. So yes, you get told about the left brain, Cialis, Viagra, needles, maybe the pump, left brainy, but maybe a bit more the anatomical reasons for it to keep that connection to men and why it makes it important for the intimacy. And other ways, of course, of being intimate is important as well. And some couples find that in their own way of experiencing being with each other. But it's nearly as if, yes, you can have a prostate cancer nurse and she'll help you with the journey, but I don't hear that being talked about much. It's more, this is what you can take or do, etc. It's the deeper stuff, what I call under the blanket, that's not getting talked about. And men and the couples feeling comfortable to talk about how they really feel impacted by the surgery. It's also taking that uncomfortable step forward and stepping out of your comfort zone and talking about it as well. And it's also communicating to your partner where you're at. I mean, it's also uncomfortable. Maybe I'm not being such a man now because now I've got to talk about this and I can't do it. Well, the other party doesn't know how you feel, so step out of your comfort zone. Even if it means seeing a counsellor to help you navigate. I like the word the map. This is a map, and the map is not the territory, basically. It's all the other things that go underneath the map. So if you're prepared to go on a new journey, it can really enliven the relationship as well.
And we've got such a unique experience in this webinar because we have Alan we get to speak to live, and in the chat box, his absolutely wonderful wife Fiona is also chiming in with some amazing comments for her perspective and experience, agreeing with you, Alan, that it's an absolute game changer if you can approach maybe counselling. She mentioned even for one session or two sessions, doesn't have to be long, just something to, it sounds like, kickstart that communication. And Fiona's also mentioned in the chat box that there's probably an insufficient emphasis on that need to deal with those parts of the map, Alan, you mentioned, the emotional, the psychological after effects. And Fiona's mentioned, look, she believes men might be less inclined to think about seeking help for that. And has that been your experience too, Alan, when you're talking with men?
Look, yeah, I have to say yes. And the context is, it'll be after the group meeting. One of the men will come up and talk to me about X, Y, and Z. And then, I will say, when we do talk about that stuff, there's a lot of laughing and stuff goes on. And I must admit that in my group, most of the men have been down that track for some time now. So, excuse me, the intimacy may be not as important for them, but whether it's men who've just been diagnosed and treated, it's certainly at the forefront. And they don't feel comfortable talking about that in the group, so I'll end up talking for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour about it. And some men, if the needle's not working properly or the Viagra and the other ones aren't working properly and stuff, they want to move on. They want to get it going. So have you heard about the pump? Yes, I have. Who do I see? You might want to talk to this gentleman or this doctor, but it's only 6 months out. You want to give yourself some time. But these men, it's not working. Let's move on. They want to fix the problem by having the implant, and that's fine. But I think some men maybe expect everything to happen overnight, which in some responses it can. And I sometimes wonder if for men, not everyone, the intimacy is having the erection, having sex, and that's it. All of a sudden they've got to reframe that whole way of being intimate with their partner now. And it's probably a sense of frustration, which I also felt for a while too. There's a whole other way you've got to do this. So it's a whole new ball game. It's a new journey. It's like you're going along life on the main track between here and Sydney, and all of a sudden someone throws the switch and you're out going via Mildura and you're not coming back in, because it's a whole new journey of way of dealing emotionally with the thing as well. Some men get on with it, others, it knocks them for six. And it really does affect the relationship. But if you can come together and find a way of communicating about what you now expect from each other. Expectations is another thing. What are you expecting to happen now? How do you expect me to function? I know anecdotally, some women think, well, if you can't get it up for me, I don't want you doing the needle or the Viagra. Well, it's a mechanical thing. The nerves aren't functioning. That's why. However, I will say that, a lot of the sexuality stuff, if you can get the hard drive working and thinking about that stuff, that will eventually add into the arousal as well.
Yeah, and you've put that perfectly. I think that breakdown of, look, there's this toolbox of the practical mechanical strategies you can throw at the thing, you know, right, what do we do next? There's needles, there's pills, you know, it is that sort of, look, what else can we throw at the problem? But of course, look, there's also the, well, what are you expecting to happen? What does your partner think's happening? The assumptions, there's things that you maybe can't get over without having that conversation. And Alicia in the chat box, I think, just reiterated that experience you're having of men who are coming up to you afterwards to talk about this. They want to talk about it. She's saying, you know, hearing the perspective of your peers is important. And as a healthcare professional, she's mentioning that they can talk until they're blue in the face, but sometimes you need to hear it from someone who has lived it.
Yeah.
Like that's why, of course, the support groups and the one that you run can be so influential, so that hearing what other people are going through, what's working for them. Look, it sounds like, though, at the end of the day, you know, you can also have all those practical strategies, but it's that being able to open up as well to your partner and even to yourself about that new change, what that new normal could be, and sort of that working out through conversation, which, like, I hear this from people all the time, could be the first time in their lives they've ever had to have these type of conversations after something like 50 years of marriage. So, you know, it's a lot to ask. I think that's something I feel we maybe don't address enough, is, you know, this isn't just a try something new. This is try all of these things for the first time in a new, uncomfortable, and you don't know how it's going to happen. So, I mean, you know, given that backdrop, Alan, I'm wondering, on your journey, you've mentioned you went to seek counselling and you clearly experiment with being more open in your communication. Can you give us anything else that you found helped you on your journey?
What else helped? I guess with the help of Fiona, taking the pressure off myself, that expectation of being able to perform or have an erection or for it wanting to happen, because I think there was a deep sense of myself wanting to know I can do it again. And also, I think the expectation on myself, I had to back off about that as well. And also I found over the couple of years, I could easily slide into, okay, it's not, we haven't been intimate for a couple of weeks. Look, I'm too busy to do anything about it. Realizing that is, for us anyway, and maybe, and certainly for, I suspect, for a lot of relationships, it's an important aspect of the relationship. So one has to make effort, whereas before, you just do it. Now you have to make effort. So you've got to reset your mindset. So I have to rethink about how I was going to do about that. I found also, once I was recovering, to get back into exercise, and even actually I went off and saw an exercise physiologist to deal with my fatigue. But also I found once my fitness level come up, my libido lifted.
Interesting.
That was an interesting one for me. And if I keep that consistently up, for me, my libido is sitting there. But of course, as men get older, that can drop off. And although the testosterone can come into it to a degree, it's important to look at those other aspects. So if your fitness is not really flash, it helps you to motivate yourself that this is going to help the relationship, and it can motivate you then. This is going to also maybe help my libido, which means then I'm going to be more in tune with what's going on and prepared to make an effort for the relationship to keep it together, basically. Because I guess for some people, it's all too hard. We'll just stay together and we'll forget about that and not realize that the other partner may be wanting that closeness. But I think it comes down to communication. But certainly the fitness was important. Talking to Fiona, reading books, the counselling certainly made a huge difference for me. But the fitness was an interesting one. And I know that sounds weird, but the neuroplasticity of our brain is what really, you know, if you start thinking and fantasizing, I will say after 6-7 years now, I will get an erection where in the first 2-3 years, nothing happened down below. I could fantasize about anything and everything, no response, because the nerves are being damaged down there. So it was rejigging that feedback loop. And now that happens quite regularly, which a lot of blokes maybe don't realize. So it's another part of working out how another way of having an erection using your mind. Maybe watching some soft porn with your wife or your partner. So I don't know, you've got to find out what works. But for me, and listening to others, this is an important aspect. What's in your hard drive, another way of dealing with it. So working that along with using your medication, whatever it may be.
That's great, Alan. And so you mentioned a few things there, and one that again has come up as a theme. It's the expectation you have on yourself. And then it sounds like towards the end of what you're saying, it's also expecting that, look, over time, it's going to take time and things will change over time as well. So look, experiment with something, there, but if it doesn't work, try it again, even if it's in a couple of years' time. And of course, the interaction of fitness is so interesting that that's been your perspective, because of course we've had a physiotherapist on who's talking about the research behind, the cardiovascular system and how that can affect sexuality. To hear it and how that again has not just the knock-on effect physically, but it has a much greater impact psychologically too, just how you're feeling in yourself. And we've had lots of amazing conversation going in the chat box. If anybody has questions for Alan as well, down to 10 minutes, and I'd love to field some questions for Alan to answer from what everyone's heard so far. And we've got another from Fiona, is mentioning humor, persistence, and keeping up with all types of affectionate behavior. She believes this is all massively important. Thank you, Fiona. Again, more pieces of this much bigger picture and bigger puzzle, which I think is great to come back to. Because look, I also can, you get into a bit of a rabbit's warren on this, where you can think, look, it's all about blood flow, and we, really focus down on what are the nerves doing, what is the actual functionality of an erection doing. However, look, there's a much bigger picture here. And we've got Chris and Marge as well mentioning a lot about the importance of a supportive partner and how that makes such a big difference, especially again with those expectations too. And they're mentioning as well, look, teasing, they love teasing each other. Something we don't mention as well. What does intimacy mean? Intimacy is this bigger package, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's all sorts of things. I mean, just as an aside on Q&A a couple of weeks ago, they had this rabbi and he felt that you should not walk around the nude in front of your wife because it reduces, the affection. They're going, really? We're in the nude all the time in the White House. What the hell?
I should clarify, Alan is called Alan White. He is, of course, also the president of, the prostate cancer world since the book, but there's a clarification there. I've had a question from Alicia. She'd love to know how best to describe the dynamics of a support group with her patients. What should people know about them and what they can gain from attending?
I think for men who've been diagnosed or just been treated, is the camaraderie and for hearing other men on all sorts of treatments, how they've dealt with it. But I will say, again, only from my experience, the sexuality stuff is joked about a lot, but it doesn't really get deep. Incontinence stuff is certainly talked about in treatments. I think it's for men to not feel they're on their own. And for some men, they come along to 1 or 2 sessions and that's it. They leave again. They've got their information moved on. And then again, men can function that way. I need to fix it. Give me a solution. I move on. That's okay. But also it becomes quite a social adhesive group to feel like you're all in the same boat. You're all dealing with the same sort of stuff. Sometimes it doesn't get very deep, but it also, there's a lot of humor. There's a lot of fun. So it lightens up what's going on, even though it's not a funny thing to talk about. But men find they learn information and hear. And that's what I consistently hear when men go to a group and come along a number of times. They are really glad they've come along. They've got information they haven't been given before. They feel like they're not on their own, and they get to hear how other blokes have dealt with other things. It may not be relevant to them, but it spreads the load. I guess that's another way of saying it as well.
That's great. And that emphasis on you have a good time is the humor, and that you said social adhesive, I think is so good as well. That's wonderful. I'm wondering if somebody wanted to go visit a support group, maybe they didn't know this concept existed until now. How do you recommend they could go about doing that? Is there an organization or somewhere this is collected?
Well, Prostate Cancer Foundation of Australia, PCFA, if you go to their website and then drop down, it'll have find a support group. The map of Australia turns up. You just click the state, so Victoria, New South Wales, and then it has a list of all the support groups, and they'll generally have a contact number and a name. I will say a lot of blokes have contacted me that way, but then I end up talking to them for probably an hour on the phone or meeting for coffee, and they don't come to the group, which is interesting. They want to get information, but they maybe don't want to deal in a group because of the situation for all sorts of reasons. That's fine. If that's what they want to do, that's okay. But they often feel a sense of relief. Their anxiety drops. They're not as tense around what's happening for them. So again, they're part of a group who've all had similar experiences. But Prostate Cancer Foundation Australia has a listing for all of Australia, all the support groups. You ring the leader, and then they can have a chat with him or her, and then decide whether they want to go to the group or maybe just have a chat to them and give them information. They often want to find out how it functions and what happens at the group. And I always explain they're not expected to give them their life story, but, you know, men like to hear where they're at. So again, it creates a context of what's your journey, so we can find out where you're at and also maybe offer some information, etc. as well.
It's great. We've got Chris and Marge, who put some really delightful comments in that they found on their own journey, which is 3 weeks post-surgery, that with the impotency, they're finding actually a greater sense of a depth of intimacy right now. Amazing sex without penetration. Thank you so much for sharing. And they're also saying that they would love it if the Prostate Cancer Foundation had a Facebook presence with support groups as well. Just check I have that correctly. Actually, Alan, I know that you're involved with Navigate and a few other organizations. What sort of resources do you feel like you'd love that everybody just knew existed who are early on in their journey?
Well, that's an interesting one. Can I just say, for PCFA do have a community website thing. I thought they had Facebook, but I'm not too sure how that would function with couples around talking about this sort of area. I guess it comes back to post-surgery. Yes, you have a prostate cancer nurse, but it really it's as if it needs something deeper for couples to go to. Now, we could talk about counselling, but I think it needs to be probably more than that. It could be a counsellor to help them navigate, for want of a better word, the new intimacy. I have an idea that there needs to be some sort of post-surgery 6 weeks after the operation of a workshop type of thing, that couples come together to share their experience and bounce ideas off each other if they want. But I think it's important that couples also, if they are struggling with the new changes, that they seek some assistance. It might be just 1 or 2 sessions to create a new journey, and then they're up and running, and then they do what they need to do at home. I have an idea that there could be a post-surgery 1-2 months, well, probably more like 3 months out, that people would come to, and that's something that's a little project of mine down the line.
You heard it here first, people. It's launched. And we will be taking email addresses for that straight afterwards. It's a great idea, Alan. And you're right. I think doing something that is more maybe combined with couples together that can lead people onwards may be good. It'd be great to hear actually if people in the chat box are interested in something like that. Yes. I think all Alan needs is some people, and he'd be off and running. So
yeah.
Like, Alan, thank you so much for joining me. We've got 3 minutes left, and I'd love to hear if anybody has any comments they'd like to share, maybe about their own journey, or would like to ask Alan a final question. Otherwise, I'll be very greedy and I'll get in there with the last question. Chris and Marge have actually just shared they find online forums, because the PCFA, of course, has the online forum. I was aware of that one myself, but that Facebook groups, they find it easy to interact with others about their journey. It's a good point. I think this has given me a good idea to just go and maybe rake a resource on a touchy subject of the Facebook groups or the online forums.
Yes.
Dip in and out and see what suits you.
Good idea. Especially in regional rural areas, that the online forums are probably a lot easier for people to deal with without having to be physically there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look at Australia, so, well, maybe not completely unique, but it's certainly a high need in Australia that there is such a muchness to this country. There's a lot of areas that cannot get, a physical workshop accessible to them. So the more online resources, the better.
Yes.
I'm now just sort of talking about why I do my particular mission. But there you go.
And that'll be another part of the project.
Yes, indeed. So, Alan, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful having you here. Actually, as the final word, I think you should mention, if people wanted to purchase your book to read about the practical survival guide for prostate cancer, where could they go to do so? Well, the website would be the quickest way. So it's www.theprostatezone, that's all one word, .com. And you just click on to buy the book. It's done via PayPal, very secure. You can download electronically from Amazon, and actually on the website you can read the first 2 chapters for free, so you can get a feel for a book. You go, I'm not really interested, that's okay. But you go, yes, I like the sound of this book, then you just order it and I post it out. So it's pretty easy.